Good morning. Just a brief word to welcome you and to remind you that we will have a long and fruitful day with a tight schedule and a short time. So we will start now with the first panel of this morning with the chair, Professor Luís Manuel de Araújo. Good morning.
Bom dia, good morning in ancient Egyptian Herunefer. The first paper is Tutankhamun in Portugal, reports in the Portuguese press, 1922-1939, by José das Candeias Salles and Susana Mota. José das Candeias Salles is a full professor in the Universidade Aberta and a researcher in the Center for History of the University of Lisbon and a member of the Centro de Estudos Globais of the Universidade Aberta. He works in the field of ancient history, Egyptology, having published many books and articles both in Portugal and abroad. He is responsible for the research project Tutankhamun in Portugal, Relatos na Imprensa Portuguesa, 1922-1939, in the field of ancient Egypt reception studies. And Susana Mota is a researcher in the Centro de Estudos Globais of the Universidade Aberta. She is also responsible for the research project in the field of ancient Egypt reception studies, titled Tutankhamun in Portugal, Relatos na Imprensa Portuguesa, 1922-1939. Since 2006, Susana Mota has done research in Egyptology, and from 2016 onwards, she has dedicated herself to researching in the field of ancient Egypt reception and Egyptomania. Okay, you have 20 minutes, 22 minutes. Okay.
Thank you, Luís. Hello, good morning. First of all, we would like to congratulate the organizers of this wonderful colloquium, and we like to start by thanking for the opportunity to presenting some of the data resulting from our research project. When in 2016 we started the research project entitled Tutankhamun em Portugal, Relatos na Imprensa Portuguesa 1922-1939, our intention was to study how the mainland Portuguese press reported the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Portugal was, in the earlier 20th century, a country with no direct connection with any archaeological work in Egypt. In addition, the national press was dominated by the political reality of the time, being the newspapers themselves openly doctrinarious. Still, the Republican regime was very conducive to the development of the press to the point that it was affirmed that Portugal was then a country of newspapers. Thus, it was our goal to understand whether, even in this particular reality, this great archaeological discovery had an impact on the mainland Portuguese press, and in what way and how intensively the news was made public. The chronological beacons of this research are the years of 1922, the year of the discovery, and 1939, the year that marks simultaneously the death of our Carter and the discovery of other intact Egyptian royal tombs in Tanis by the French archaeologist Pierre Montet. Our sources were the newspapers and magazines published in the mainland Portugal during the 17 years that ran from 1922 to 1939. Through the specialized bibliography of the Portuguese press, it was possible to identify, for the defined period, 78 titles, 58 newspapers, and 21 magazines. The consultation of these titles lead us to the identification of 28 publications, 24 newspapers, 4 magazines, in which were identified news related to the discovery of the Tutankhamun's tomb and the several events associated with it, a total of 234 news and articles.
From the organization of the available data, we noticed that the year with the highest number of news is 1923. Okay. It's 1923 with 170 news, followed by 1924 with 94 news. In these 2 years, we found 211 of the 234 news items we collected. That is 90% of the total. This overwhelming preponderance is fully justified by the fact that these 2 years are the ones with the highest numbers of the facts surrounding the discovery. 1923 is the year of the official opening of the tomb and the death of Lord Carnarvon, and 1924, the work in the tomb continues, and the problems that occurred between Howard Carter and the Egyptian government surrounding the continuation of the excavation work stands out. The year of 1939, which closes our chronology, appears in 3rd place, albeit only with 10 news, all dedicated to the death of Lord Howard Carter or to the new discoveries that occurred in Tanis. We may say that almost as important as the presence are the absences. We should mention 2. The first in 1922, the year of the discovery of the tomb, of which we only have 1 text published in the newspaper O Século and 3 of December of 1922. The second absence happens in 1925-1926, the year in which the most iconic piece of the Tutankhamun tomb was found, the funerary mask of the pharaoh. In this year, only 9 news were identified, none of which related to the mask, which means that no news were published in the Portuguese press that alludes to the discovery of the news or image surrounding the famous mask of the pharaoh. Let us now look at the characteristics of the collected news. It's easy to conceive that the 234 news published did not all have the same characteristics, nor did they deserve exactly the same journalistic approach. Compiling and observing closely the characteristics of all this data, we established with our own labels 8 great typologies of news. The different typologies of news allow us to perceive that we are dealing with a set of texts and images of different natures and with different origins. However, this also highlights the fact that most of the news is not original, or at least written in its original form by journalists or reporters of the national publications. That is, much attention was paid by the Portuguese press to the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. However, what was published is essentially the result of news sent from abroad from news agencies, or were copies or adaptations of news from foreign newspapers, more specifically French newspapers. Resorting to what comes from outside cannot be seen as a disinterest on the subject. Such an hypothesis is contradicted by the space that the publications gave to it. It seems to make more sense to think that those who wrote in the Portuguese press of the time, a press that was mostly centered on political themes and focused on national politics, may have not felt they had enough information and knowledge to address the subject and do an in-depth research on it. It is, therefore, clear that despite living one of the most troubled political and social periods in its history, and although its numerous newspapers and magazines were essentially and mainly devoted to political intervention, Portugal did not escape the interest that the discovery and the excavation of the tomb of Tutankhamun stimulated all over the world.
Embarking on this worldwide movement, the mainland Portuguese press reported the most varied questions about what was happening in Egypt. However, what was more intensively published and explored, focused on three essential aspects, such as the historical knowledge and learnings that stem from the discovery, that what we labeled as Know the Past, the patrimonial and artistic value of the findings, what we labeled Cherish the Past, and the question of the curse of the mummy, or the revenge of the pharaoh, that will be the cause of the premature death of Lord Carnarvon, what we label as Fear the Past. Let us look at these issues in more detail. The first set of news, Know the Past, dedicated to the historical knowledge and learnings that stem from the discovery, is exemplified by a text from a newspaper, A Capital. On the 3rd of January 1923, even before the official opening of the tomb, this newspaper published a text, a full copy of an original from the French newspaper Excelsior, which content seems so relevant that it was published by two other Portuguese newspapers, O Comércio do Porto and Correio da Manhã. This text, entitled The Excavations of Luxor, the whole history of Egypt will be revealed, the holy books in the face of reality, had as its main purpose to demonstrate that the rolls of papyri discovered in the tomb, still to be deciphered, would help to fill the gaps in the history of ancient Egypt. Curiously, it becomes clear throughout the text that rather than only discovering the history of ancient Egypt, there was a great interest in its relation to the history of the Hebrew people. And there was even the chance that the discovery helped to clarify the date of the Exodus and validate the Pentateuch narratives. These texts present the amazing discoveries from the tomb as precisely contributions for the elucidation of legendary and enigmatic events from ancient history and the relation of the Egyptian history to biblical history values.
The second category of news emphasized the patrimonial riches found in the tomb, highlighting its artistic significance. The patrimonial and artistic value of the findings were highly valued, not only focused on the material wealth and associated luxury, but mainly emphasizing the beauty and the quality of the pieces of art that were becoming known. As a testimonial to this interest, we point out three examples of many possible ones, since they are the most illustrative of the two different approaches to these topics. We have the news published by CH-ULisboa stands out for the richness of the text and for the way the discovery were described. It's an original text written by Joaquim Gomes Monteiro, a journalist, a writer, and essayist that, in a very eloquent way, praises and values Egypt in general and the tomb of Tutankhamun in particular. The text may be divided in three parts. In the first part, the author expresses appreciation for the archaeological findings and for the labor of the English researchers. The second one aims mainly to enumerate, for the reader's enjoyment, the magnificent objects found in the tomb. And the third part, and last one, emphasizes that the discoveries made until then had happened only in the antechamber of the tomb, and aims to excite the public and sustain their attention for the continuation of the excavation works. The author produces an informative and appreciative text about the discovery, capable of fascinating its readers by the beauties produced by the ancient Egypt, brought into the public knowledge by archaeology. The Egyptian artistic riches are more valued for their civilizational dimension than from their material significance. In a different register, two news published by the magazine Ilustração Portuguesa, one from March 1923 and another from January 1924, by the profusion of images published, allowed the Portuguese readers to see and not only to imagine the riches of the tomb of Tutankhamun. These two news consist essentially of images, 13 in the news from 1923 and 17 from the news from 1924. The text in this news was used just as a background to the photos they accompanied. Nevertheless, they deserve to be mentioned due to the way they emphasize their value and beauty. By comparison with other stories about Tom's artistic riches, the great value of these two numbers of Ilustração Portuguesa is that they provide an opportunity to see images of the numerous pieces of Tutankhamun treasure, effectively giving Portuguese readers a direct observation of the extent of the beauty of those pieces.
The principal news theme, especially following the 5th of April of 1923, the date of the death of Lord Carnarvon, was the revenge of the mummy, or the revenge of Tutankhamun, the third category of news, that we labeled as Fear the Past. This topic of guaranteed success to the general public was used in large scale by the mainland Portuguese press. Examples of these include the news headlines that are revealing of the will to draw public attention to a magical and superstitious dimension supposedly associated with ancient Egyptian religion and past. These obvious sensationalistic headlines systematically report to expressions like threat, revenge, mystery, black magic, superstition, profanation, desecrators, that under an innocuous and informative appearance transmit judgments of value that help to shape the reader's perspective on the civilization of ancient Egypt. Egypt was displayed in this news as the context of a primitive thought impregnated with mysteries and black magic so powerful that was able to overtake the limits of time to punish those who disturb the dead, the eternal rest of an ancient king. No matter who the victim was, the pharaoh revenge was implacable and infallible. The mainland Portuguese newspaper promoted the idea that a curse had struck down Lord Carnarvon, along with a plethora of other intellectuals, journalists, and visitors of the tomb. Curiously, Howard Carter, the finder of the tomb, the person who more than anybody dared to disturb and challenge Tutankhamun, lived another 17 years, 10 of which he spent working in the tomb, and died in 1939 at the age of 65.
Well, first of all, we must say that it's quite difficult for us to summarize the main ideas that arose from 6 years of investigation in only 20 minutes presentation. We are asked to give a 2 hours conference in the last year, so even so, it remained much unsaid. Nevertheless, we quickly realized that although Portugal was not, at the time, a country with Egyptological experience and tradition, and that it was going through one of the most troubled political and social periods in its history, the Portuguese press did not only not ignore the subject, but on the contrary, they gave it a place of prominence in its pages, mainly during the years of 1923 and 1924. In Portugal, the richness of Egyptian history, its artistic wealth, and the mysteries and superstitious religion associated with this civilization were widely reported and thus actively contributed to the reader's perception of the ancient Egyptian people, their history, and their culture. So, in our country, Tutankhamun was a means by which the civilization of ancient Egypt became closer and more present, manifested, for example, in poetry and literature, and even in interior decoration. To finish, a last word to give notice of the exhibition that is being held until the 5th of April at the National Library of Portugal, which has the same name, that's our project, and which was our way of making the results of our research known to the general public, and a modest contribution to the commemorations of the centennial of the discovery of Tutankhamun tomb. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.